Today's topic, we are going to talk about hope for caregivers, blending knowledge and faith. So I went through yesterday, and I always update these programs before I do them each year because this is one that we do every December. And I really start this one with the latest statistics and things that have come out specifically about caregivers. And then the second half of it, we're really going to talk about how caregiving can be our ministry if we will see it that way, if we will view it that way, and ways that maybe we're being called to do this, even if we want to stomp our feet and say, absolutely not. It can be a call and it can be a real blessing. And again, you'll get all these slides later today. Jamie will send those out. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because we do have a lot to cover this hour. Again, we're glad you're here. Slideshow from the beginning. All right, Susan, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. I could see your face first. That's why I asked you. This is just some information about the West Center. For those of you that don't already know, in 2023, we will be opening up a short-term rehab that will be a place that people can come like straight from the hospital after they've had a hip replacement or something like that, specific to dementia, because many times we know somebody goes to rehab, they have dementia, and they'll release them and say they're non-compliant because the therapists just simply don't know how to work with someone with dementia. We're going to have a short-term rehab here at the West Center that will be able to accept Medicare. So that is one of the great things we've got coming up next year, as well as our day program moving over to its new building down near Harris Southwest, where we will be able to have up to 60 participants a day. Here at the West Center, we've got 25. We can have 25 a day, but we'll be able to have up to 60, and that should be right after the first of the year. Here's our course description for those of you that are going to be needing those CEUs. We're going to talk about how to find hope throughout the caregiving journey. We're going to talk about stress and what that does to caregivers. And we've got some brand new statistics. Most all new statistics come out in August, but I actually went on the Alzheimer's Association website yesterday, and there's some newer ones even since August. We're not going in the right direction. Let me put it that way before we get there. There's our outline, there's our objectives. And then here's a picture with two of my favorite people. This is whenever I got the chance to visit with Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. I've had the opportunity to go out to Georgia several times and be trained at the Rosalind Carter Institute. But listen to this quote from Mrs. Carter. There are only four kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. That's all of us. And some of us, as you look at that quote, may go, wow, at one time I was the one who needed a caregiver, maybe after that knee replacement or that surgery, and now I am a caregiver. Or maybe we've been a caregiver. That just, it's everybody. Now, I want you to also, let's look at this ad here for the perfect caregiver. This is what it takes to be a perfect caregiver. Full-time caregiver for a dementia patient. You must have unlimited stamina, be energetic, alert and attentive, friendly and caring, totally understanding and forever patient. Must be willing to always subordinate own needs to those of the patient and have few, if any, other commitments. You must know how to handle any situation. A background degree in psychology or human relations is preferred. Plus, you need some basic nursing skills, a basic knowledge of medications and their interactions, as well as all their side effects. Must be prepared to work for no pay and expect little, if any, appreciation of all above abilities from the patients. There's also some rules for caregivers, like be loyal, be perfect, do it all yourself, don't rock the boat, meet with everyone's approval, don't be selfish, do it all perfectly and do it all yesterday, do it right and do it now. If we go along those lines, aren't we setting ourselves up for failure? But we sometimes are the ones that put that on ourselves because we think that's what the perfect caregiver is supposed to be. And we can't possibly do that. Here's some of those new numbers that I just pulled. And again, we're kind of going to look at the statistics of caregiving and then move into how to blend our faith into caregiving. We know caregivers are called the hidden patient. Some of these are from 2020, some are from 21, and then these from 22 are brand new numbers. 16 million Americans providing unpaid care for people with dementia. Here's a new number. In 2022, these caregivers will provide an estimated 18.6 billion with a B hours of care valued at nearly $271.6 billion. The 2021 number, the number I had on this slide last year, was 246 billion. Now it's 271.6 billion. 21% of adult population in the United States are caregivers, and 75% of those are women. And of those women, a third of them are adult daughters. 59% of caregivers work outside the home. That tells us, the statistic is that a quarter of us, I'm one of these, we're those sandwich caregivers where we're taking care of a parent, but we've either got a child at home, maybe one of those boomerang kids that have come back, or we may have grandkids that we're taking care of. And 30% of all caregivers are over the age of 65. Then I was able to find, these are some new numbers specific to Texas. So if you're in Texas, this is specific to Texas. And you can actually go on the Alzheimer's Association website, alz.org, and they've got a place called Facts and Figures, and you can put your state in if you're not in Texas. So in 2020, in Texas, there were about 400,000 people over the age of 65 with dementia. In 2025, they're thinking that that's going to be about 490,000. In the state of Texas right now, there's 333 geriatricians in the whole state, and we're a big state. For us to meet the growth, we need that to go up 276.9% by 2050. And the fact is that we aren't getting near as many people going into medical school or into nursing. And those that are going in aren't going into geriatrics. We're working to try to get them there. We go in and we teach specialized classes. We're part of it here in Fort Worth, but they're not going into geriatrics. Now let's look at home health aides. Right now, there's 293,400 home health aides in Texas, and we're going to need about 32% more just by 2028. Some more Texas statistics. In 2021, Texas had 1,085,000 unpaid caregivers. So those are basically your family caregivers, like what many of you are. That's a total of unpaid care. That's 1,769,000,000 hours, and that's in 1 year. 56% of home caregivers report chronic health problems themselves. And 11%, and this is going to be interesting when we look later in the slides, only about 11% of people in Texas that are caregivers report depression. We got a bunch of people not telling the truth. Because when we look at the statistics of the rest of the country, they're much higher. Or we've got some people who don't realize that it's depression. They're thinking that it's something else, and it's actually depression. Now let's look at this one. Again, this is specific to Texas. In 2019, there were 10,101 deaths from dementia. They died from the disease, end stage of the disease, or one of the things that happens because of the disease. And since the year 2000, that's up 219%. Sometimes those numbers get a little bit staggering and even hard for us to be able to wrap our mind around. This one we use a lot because it's so powerful. And if you haven't heard it before, and again, this is one we want to share this. We want to share this with other family members also. Spouses, specifically spouses between the ages of 66 and 96, who are taking care of their loved one at home, have a 68% higher risk of dying. And then this one is one of our newest statistic, and it's about adult children because they finally have started tracking adult children and their health. That adult children have a 63% higher risk of dying over the course of a 4-year period if they take care of their parent for 4 years or more. I've watched it. I've been to those funerals. These aren't just numbers. This is real. Where adult children die or have strokes or heart attacks because of the stress of being a caregiver. So what is it that's happening to caregivers? And again, we're going to blend this together, but I wanted us to look at the statistics of it first, so we realize how important this is. This particular poll was done by our great friends at the Rosalind Carter Institute, and they did it in October of 2020. And think about what was going on in October of 2020. We were well right there in the middle of the pandemic, and 83% of caregivers reported increased stress since the beginning of the pandemic. And think about all those reasons and why that happened. A debilitating impact on their overall mental and physical health, and that's the caregiver. That's not the person with dementia. And many of you are probably one of those numbers. Here's the quote that the Rosalind Carter Institute put out, and this is the quote also. Mrs. Carter is still, and she is well into her 90s, very active and working at the Rosalind Carter Institute. But listen to this quote: if we do not begin to seriously address the needs of caregivers and provide the necessary supports, this indispensable, largely invisible component of our healthcare system is in danger of collapse. And what are we going to do? We don't have enough beds for everybody, because in reality, the majority of people with dementia are at home. They're not placed. Think about what's different with this disease. It's not a typical disease model. It doesn't just affect the patient. It affects the entire family, and that primary caregiver specifically, because they need us more and more and more. And it's not for a short period of time. This is over the course of many years. And we're going to look at some of those statistics in a minute before we start to kind of blend our faith with this. Those of us who are taking care of somebody with dementia, we are prone to burnout because there is a long process of decline. So that puts us at a much higher risk for also what's called compassion fatigue, where we are worn out from being compassionate all the time. And it isn't because we don't want to do it. We're just exhausted. And we're not just exhausted physically. We're going to look at some symptoms, and I want you to see yourself in some of them also. Because think about dementia, depending on what age our loved one is diagnosed and depending on which type of dementia they have, remembering that there's over 130 different types of dementia. We tend to see 5 to 8 of them over and over, Alzheimer's disease being the most common. They can live anywhere from 3 to 20 years. Now, that's not very often that we have somebody live 20 years. I've known one person that lived 23 years, but that's in my whole career. We're going to look at life expectancy on the next slide. But we actually go through grief. And those of you who are in the support group, and I see lots of you on today that are part of support group, this is some of the stuff that we talk about. This is actual grief that we're feeling. That's where we're really going to be able to start blending our faith in with this. They're still alive, but we're losing them. That's called ambiguous grief, when you're grieving the loss of someone who's still alive. Ambiguous grief. Because we're not just grieving, we're grieving the loss of our relationships with them the way that they were. They're still here. And then, of course, we have anticipatory grief over what's to come. Now, here's the statistic where I'm saying when Texas was reporting, some of them were not reporting completely truthfully, or they didn't completely understand what depression is. Because across the board nationwide, about 80% of caregivers will report feelings of depression. And when you study dementia, depression and dementia do tend to go hand in hand, not just for the person with dementia, but for caregivers. Our loved ones that have dementia are going to go on and off of antidepressants throughout the course of the disease, early in the disease, because they know something's going on. They know it, just like we know when something's wrong with us. They know something's going on. And then later in the disease, we may find them back on antidepressants after they've come off of them in the mid stage. Maybe, not everybody, simply because of all the brain changes and the chemical changes in the brain. New numbers on life expectancy in the United States. We were climbing every year. We were going up, 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 and then bam, we had a pandemic hit us. And the last 2 years, men and women have both dropped. Now, this is us. This is across the board. This is people that don't have dementia. Life expectancy in the United States right now for a man is 76. It took a tumble. And life expectancy for women in the United States right now is 81. Those are brand new numbers. So think about this. If life expectancy for somebody who develops dementia before the age of 65 is 3 to 5 years, that's average. And life expectancy for someone who develops dementia after the age of 65 is about 10 years, but life expectancy 76 and 81. I had this talk with a family member this week. So if our loved one develops dementia, our mother, a woman, at 80, she develops dementia. And you may go, oh, but life expectancy is 10 years. Wait a minute, she's already 80. And a person without dementia's life expectancy is just 81. Are they going to live 10 years? Probably not. It's a terminal disease. Their brain is dying. Their brain is failing. So we just got to be careful with how we look at the numbers. Some other ways that dementia affects us as caregivers is criticism from other family members. I'm sure I'm the only one that has this, nobody else. This is something that most all of us face, is we've got other family members that are telling us what we just should be doing or what we're not doing the way they think we should. And so we go through, those of you who've studied Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, many caregivers will go through those stages of grief, and they go through them over and over and over again. As our loved ones go to that next stage, we'll start over with the denial. Oh, no, it can't be. We just got settled in. We just started going to the day program. I'm back at work. We've got a plan. We've got a routine. Uh-oh. They're becoming incontinent. They're starting to fall. They can't get dressed by themselves. And we realize we're moving into that next stage, that middle stage, and we'll start back through denial. Now, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a man named David Kessler studied with her in her later years, and they actually created a 6th stage that they called meaning. When we get to the point in a disease where we can find meaning in it, and we're going to talk about that when we get to how we can blend our faith with being a caregiver, is finding meaning in it. Some other statistics that we find with caregivers and how isolation can impact caregivers. The easiest emotion is anger. for lots of people. It's the easiest emotion to go to. It's one of the first emotions that we have as a child. Think about that little teeny tiny infant curling their fist and making, they can get so mad. That's anger. It's one of the first emotions, and it's the easiest one to go back to. At the root of anger for most adults is fear. But right now, we're reporting higher levels of anger and frustration than we've reported before. And caregivers are saying they tend to have a shorter fuse, sometimes with their loved ones, sometimes with everybody else in their life, where we're biting the heads off of people we work with or other people in our family. These numbers, just changed them yesterday on this slide from last year. Prescriptions for antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications are up 38%. Last year, that number was 34%. And then alcohol use. This has really gone up during the pandemic, because I want to tell you how this changed from last year. And we're starting to come back to, and I hate using that word new normal just because I hate it. We're still kind of messy middle, but we're pulling into something that's going to be a new normal, I guess. But look at this number. Alcohol sales are up in 2022, 57% in women and 63% in men. Last year, those numbers were 41 for women and 54 for men. That's a big jump in a year. And I wished I'd have kept my 2020 numbers, because it was this, I do remember that women were in the 30s. It was 30 something percent for women. And now it's 57, because alcohol's easy. It's easy. We can pick that up at the grocery store. And a few more statistics. 41% of women caregivers and 54% of men caregivers will report that they cope, that their coping skill is using alcohol. 51% of caregivers admit to overusing their prescription medications. Typically, it is something like an anti-anxiety that gets overused. You really can't overuse an antidepressant, but you can overuse an anti-anxiety. 16% of caregivers report that they've started smoking again after many times being off of nicotine for many, many years. And here's the big one. I'm going to go ahead and just raise my hand to this one. 72% of caregivers are overweight. Talk about an easy one. That's super easy. Comfort food, comfort drink, comfort med. And sometimes when we are under a tremendous amount of stress, we go back to what we knew originally. So if we had a bad coping habit or skill, we'll go back to it. And we just went through what we could call a trauma with a pandemic, and trauma triggers trauma. We'll go back and pick up something that we laid down a long time ago. So let's move into kind of the emotions, as we've looked at some statistics, some emotions of caregivers, and then how we're going to tie them together with blending our faith with this. Many of you have seen this particular picture. We use it an awful lot to teach. That's a normal 3-pound brain on the left. That brain on the right is 1 pound, and that's somebody at the very end of Alzheimer's disease. All of the dementias, the brain is dying. So it's pretty powerful. It looks a little bit different. If it's frontotemporal, it's going to pull back more up here in the frontotemporal parts. But with all of our loved ones that have dementia, their brain's literally dying. So their ability to be reasonable or be rational is affected early in the disease. And their filter may disappear pretty early in the disease, so that they will say or do things that they never would have said or done. And now we've got years of this. The ability to sequence starts to decline pretty early, as well as their self-awareness, their language centers. And we have 2 language centers, one on the left and one on the right. They're both damaged, but that one on the left is going to go away. And that's our day-to-day language. There's good things about the right side of the brain remaining, that right rhythmic remains center, because that means that they can sing, and it means that they can pray. And it means that they still know poetry, and that means they still know A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Many people for a long time, because that's rhythmic language. But a lot of you on here have been on our classes where we've taught those three things that also store on the right: curse words, sex talk, and racial slurs. They store on the right because they don't store on the left, because left is day-to-day language. And for most of us, curse words, racial slurs, and sex talk is not day-to-day language, so it stores on the right. So it remains. So some of these feelings that we will find ourselves having as a caregiver, it can be resentment, especially adult children, because of a role reversal, and it's taking time away from my immediate family. Finding ourselves overwhelmed by being that sandwich generation, and unappreciated by never hearing those words, thank you. Not only from the person we're taking care of, but other family members that maybe seem to be expecting this of us. Isolation, and then the big guilt. Whether it's guilt over placement, we've got a program. In fact, I think our Lunch and Learn next month might be the I Made a Promise program. Or guilt of, am I doing enough? Or guilt, I don't know what to do. Or guilt because I'm doing so much for my parents, I'm not doing enough for my kids. So let's look at some of the unspoken roles, and then we're going to get into living by faith. These are some roles that we oftentimes place on ourselves, but all of us growing up, we had a role in our family. Think back to that. And you know what happens at the holiday time when we get together with that extended family? Sometimes we fall back in that role. We find ourselves just becoming the fixer, the strong one, the clown, the nurturer, the punching bag, the money, the unreliable one, the flighty one. Many times we started playing these roles as children, especially if we had, it's really interesting to study birth order. If you've never done that, that's something to study. And these roles can be inflexible in our families. Even if we break out of it, we come back together at holiday time, we're all together, and we can find ourselves falling back in these roles. And that can increase our stress. So at this point, we're going to start switching gears from the statistics and facts of the disease and start talking about how our faith plays into caregiving. Whenever I wrote this program several years ago, I put a lot of prayer and a lot of time into this, and truly asked that the Holy Spirit lead me to what needed to be said in this program for caregivers. And I'll tell you what comes back time and time and time again. Whenever we are somebody who lives by faith, we already know that we live by believing and not by seeing. And so I put it in bold and I underlined there, believers are assured by their faith that there is another and a happy life after this one is ended. Mm-hmm. Because think about this, we see, because we're going to talk about the seen and the unseen, we see death, we see pain and suffering, we see challenge, we see and feel burden, but there is so much that is unseen. And if you've studied the Bible at all and you've studied Paul, where he talks about the suffering of the moment, the suffering of the moment. Many of you know that I'm the facilitator of our 11th hour program here at the West Center. And our 11th hour program is where we have a team of volunteers who sits with our residents as they pass and with the families. And I've got to tell you, from having sat with over 300 people as they've died, probably the number one thing that families say in those first 5 to 10 minutes after their loved one has passed away is something along the lines of, they are whole again. I had a woman at her husband's funeral use these words. They've stayed with me forever. She said, "Death was our friend. Death in this case was a blessing. He is whole." I don't know that people who hadn't walked through dementia would clearly understand that. The things that are seen are all incidents and circumstances of our present life. What we're seeing right now is because it's happening right now, and it's bound by time. And can't we get caught up in time when we're loving somebody that has dementia? They can be in a stage that we get to thinking, this is never going to end. But haven't we all been through times like that in our lives before? Whether we went through a divorce at one time, maybe we were a student with this school is never going, I'm never going to get that degree. We were bound by time. And our loved ones are bound by time, because this life is temporary for all of us. But we've got to focus on the things that are unseen, faith and eternal life, because those don't have time limits. There's going to be a time, and when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel like it, but some of you are on that are already at that point where you can look back and be thankful that you were the one that got to do this with your loved one. And we don't look at it as I had to do it. We look at it and get to say, I was able to do it. What a blessing. I love this graphic, because aren't we the worst about how are you? I'm fine. When what we really meant to say was, and it's in the graphic, I'm falling apart, useless, broken, I'm confused, I'm rejected, I'm lonely, I'm defeated. I'm fine. Thanks for asking. How many times have you said that when somebody asks you how you do it? Oh, I'm good, thanks. Because sometimes as caregivers, especially, we go, do they really want to know? Or is this just social? So I want to ask you if you see any of these things in yourself, especially that anger, because anger, again, is that easiest emotion for many people to fall back into. Are you starting to have some health problems? And we're going to look at some specifically, but so many folks don't realize that gastrointestinal issues can go hand in hand with being a caregiver, because when we dump that cortisol and when we dump that adrenaline, our digestive system stops, because our body thinks it's time to fight, flight, freeze, flee. And so our digestive system will just stop. And then we end up with irritable bowel. And then do you have somebody that you can talk to that doesn't try to fix it? We need people that we can talk to that just doesn't try to fix it for us. They're just an ear. I've put on here some local numbers for assistance and resources. That's the local, if you're in Fort Worth, Alzheimer's Association number. And they've got so many different, they've got support groups, they've got programs, everything that they offer is free. I used to work for the Alzheimer's Association. Great association. That's where I got connected to the Rosalind Carter Institute. I've got their information on here as well. Their website's on here, and you're going to get these slides later today, so you don't have to worry about trying to get all these down. But that 800 number that I put on there that says helpline 24/7, that's the Alzheimer's Association 800 number. That is somebody in the United States who answers that number 24 hours a day. If it's 2 in the morning and your loved one's trying to leave, you can call that number and they will talk you through it. If it's the 3rd day and your loved one hasn't taken a shower or a bath and you're at your wit's end, or the 5th day or the 10th day or whatever it is, you can call somebody, and those are trained dementia care specialists on that phone. I used to be one of them. It's a great resource that so many people don't know about it. If your loved one's walking down the road and you're following them in the car because you don't know where you're going, you can call that number and they'll talk you through it. Everybody also has a local area agency on aging. I put the 800 number there also for it. I've got our website, and then I've got the Rosalind Carter Institute website. They offer some fantastic resources and classes, and they're all free. They're all free to caregivers. And the Rosalind Carter Institute also has a special programming that they do for caregivers of somebody who was a veteran. That's a whole, Mrs. Carter got together with Elizabeth Dole, and Elizabeth Dole oversees that one. Elizabeth Dole and Rosalind Carter put that one together. I wanted us to look a little more specifically at some signs of burnout before we move more into a little deeper with our faith, and see if you see some of these things in yourself. I've got it, I broke it into emotional and physical, because lots of times we don't always think of the emotional part of it. I realize the physical. Notice on physical where I put repeated actions. You catch yourself doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Sometimes that is for self-soothing. I'm a rocker. I'll sit here in this chair and I rock. It's a repetitive motion. It's a self-soothing motion. And the more stressed you are, you may be somebody whose foot bounces, bounce, 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 bounce. Self-soothing. It's a repetitive motion. Now because we have a filter and a 3-pound brain, we know when that's appropriate and maybe not necessarily appropriate. It might not be appropriate for me to be sitting in a staff meeting here and me to really be rocking back and forth. But here in my office with the door shut, I can rock all I want to. But we'll see our loved ones with dementia start doing repetitive motions. Let's look at this.
So you listen to the Bill Haley song "Rock Around the Clock," huh?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Here's some more scripture that really came to me whenever I was thinking about this being temporary. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. The outward man is continuously undergoing a gradual process of decay. This is all of us. But the inward man, the higher spiritual life, is day by day passing through successive stages of renewal and grace, gaining fresh energies. The weight of glory far exceeds the weight of a momentary duration of an affliction. This is momentary. I watch families transform and develop new skill sets every day as they go through this journey. And they may not be seeing it in the moment, but I've had the privilege of being with some families for years after their loved one has passed. And sometimes they teach programs with me. And sometimes they can run the support group. And sometimes they find this skill set that they never wanted, being able to then bless other people with it. So what are you going to do with this? That's where the meaning comes in. I had a woman who was one of my clients when I was at the Alzheimer's Association. Her husband got to where he could only eat pureed foods. And pureed foods don't ever look very pretty, and they don't always taste great. She wrote a cookbook on pureed foods because she started experimenting. And she said, if I'm having this problem, I know other people are having this problem. She wrote a cookbook. She would have never done that if she hadn't gone through this. Many of you know that a support group member, her husband is here, Kathy Goodwin, has written a book about her family's journey. Love Remembers, about her journey, and she's reaching and helping so many families by telling her story. She would have never thought she'd have written a book in a million years. People start websites, YouTube pages, and they educate other people by giving back. Some other signs of stress that you may be seeing in yourself. You yourself may develop short-term memory problems. And if you realize you're developing short-term memory problems, that typically is not dementia. That's called stress. Oh my gosh, I forgot that. Because a person with dementia, as we know, most of the time won't remember that they forgot. We may say something like, oh, you missed that appointment at 11 this morning. I didn't even have an appointment at 11 this morning. You stupid. What are you even talking about? That would be more like a dementia. But if we start to forget things or misplace things or just have poor concentration, most of the time that's stress. We can even start to neglect our own appearance. We may not bathe as often as we used to, sometimes because we don't have time, because we're so busy. Or if we start having sleeping difficulties or no energy reserves, changes in eating and drinking we've talked about. And if we have, there's that short fuse where we're easily irritated, angered, or sad. And sometimes the holidays can trigger that. Think about this verse right here. And when do you usually see it? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper for you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future. I know that's the verse that's on my ring from Dallas Baptist University. That's the verse for DBU. So usually we see this at graduations, maybe at weddings. It's usually at the beginning of something. Every day can be a beginning. This verse tells us our time is not over. The hope is a better time in store for us. Waiting for the future instead of trusting in the immediate release is true wisdom. We want immediate release for our loved ones and for ourselves, because most people will say things like, when is this going to be over? And they say it in a safe place, like a support group or here in my office with me. And I remind them, we're not really praying that our loved one die. That's not what we're praying. We're praying this disease be over. We're praying they be whole again. And have you ever had that thought, or has it gone through your mind, why me and why my loved one? It's very common to have that thought. If it has, that's not something to beat yourself up over. But it is something that in our faith, we may turn it to, why not me? Why not our family? I don't know why. But when we can get to where we say, but why not? And we can start using this every day. That Serenity Prayer, there's a reason that's the prayer of the 12-step programs. I've got it all over my office in here. And I love the ones that are written like this, and those 3 words stand out: serenity, courage, and wisdom. Because if we could say this, and when we sometimes are having to step out and take that breath, because we know the difference between a reaction and a response sometimes is one breath. And if we could let this very short, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That fits with our situation all day long. We can't change this disease. But there are things about us that we can change. Like, am I going to react or am I going to respond? And the wisdom to know, what things do I just need to start letting go of? Yes, my mother's wearing somebody else's sweater with a big stain on it. So what? Not going to get bent out of shape over that because she likes that sweater with stain on it. Not a big deal. But what we can find ourselves doing as a caregiver is we can control that little something and beat somebody up over that. What if we let it go? Have you ever thought about this journey as your ministry? And when you think of the word ministry, what comes to mind? It probably isn't dementia. that comes to mind. But what if this is called cognitive behavior therapy, where we reframe our thoughts. What if we reframed our thoughts to think of this journey as our ministry? Because I want you to think about what the definition of ministry is. Ministry is being a servant to the needs of the flock. Ministry is serving others. Think about all the other things that happened in your life that weren't planned. Because one of the number one things do I hear people say is, Holly, this wasn't planned. This wasn't the plan. We were supposed to travel.
Yeah.
We just bought an RV. We were. This wasn't the plan. But let's think back of how many other things have happened to us throughout our lives that wasn't the plan, that ended up working out. There was none of us that's ever been divorced that went into that first marriage saying, you know, I think I'm just going to divorce this person someday so that I can eventually meet the love of my life. None of us went into that first marriage like that. The plan was that it stay together. Today, already at a little afternoon, I've already had things happen today that weren't planned. They just fell in my lap. It wasn't the plan. That's why I write in my agenda in pencil. I never write in ink. There's a good lesson for you. I learned that as a teacher. Always write in pencil. There was a November several years ago where I had 11 residents die in 1 month. There were times that I was going from room to room. That wasn't planned. That was hard. The fact that we've been called to do this is a source of strength. I love this graphic. It's God calling. What if God was calling? God doesn't call the worthy and the qualified. He calls the willing, and he makes us qualified. He calls those of us that say, here I am, send me. And we might not know what we were getting into when we said that, because some of you may have said that. I said it when I went through and got my master's degree in counseling. I said, Lord, here I am, send me. I didn't know where I was going to land. And I didn't know I was going to be on this journey, just like you didn't know you were going to be on this journey. And what if we answered that call? Endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill all the duties of your ministry. It's in 2 Timothy. Think about the translation that's going on in Timothy. Paul is charging Timothy to abstain from arguments and to keep the simple word of the truth, to be patient and gentle with all. And boy, can we get pushed about our patience and gentleness, especially about the 12th or 13th or 14th time that our loved one asks us the same question. And to separate himself from the way that other people were behaving. And he was to always be watchful. Paul also tells him to be prepared to suffer. Paul tells Timothy there's a high reward for such brave endurance. We use the word resilience a lot with caregivers, but boy, have we got to have endurance. The work of an evangelist refers to performing our duties correctly with much thought and with much prayer. We can think of ourselves as the hand and feet of God, the hand and feet of Christ. God is using you as a caregiver to show his glory and mercy to everyone, because you know that everybody's watching you. Other family members are watching you. Other people see how you interact with your loved one. And these verses stood out to me. Whenever you possibly can, do good to those who need it. And we also know, as people of faith, that he always hears us, but sometimes his answer is no. I know we've all had that answer be no before, when we didn't understand why. I want to spend a few minutes talking about How is it that someone can truly care for someone when they feel they don't deserve it? And this is when we are taking care of somebody that maybe we didn't necessarily get along with. We did not all grow up in the house with Ward and June. Not everybody's going to get that reference. We did not all grow up in a perfect home. And then we end up taking care of a parent that maybe wasn't very good to us. I know an awful lot of people who take care of ex-spouses. They're their power of attorney. And sometimes it's an estranged child who hadn't been around a while, and now that parent is sick, or their stepchildren. I love this. Just because you're mad at someone doesn't mean you stop loving them. We can be mad at him, but look, he's still putting the umbrella over there. He's mad, but he's still taking care of her. And you know, sometimes that's all we can do. I've got some things on here about emotional baggage. If you were hurt in the past by the person with dementia that you're now responsible for, that you now have to take care of, it all comes down to forgiveness. And I want to share with you about a mother and a son. They were a military family. His dad was in the Marines, and his mother ran that house like those kids were in the Marines. And she was hard on those two boys. And then both of them ended up with dementia. The mom and the dad did. And the dad became the sweetest, most loving guy. And so did the mom. She told everybody how much she loved them. She would come in my office. She would do it. She's one of the first people I ever got a paper shredder for, because she would sit and just shred papers for me all day long. She wanted to help. And then she'd kiss me and tell me how much she loved me. And I was talking to this son one day, and he said, "You better be glad that's the woman you know, because that is not the woman that raised me." Ooh, he was carrying some stuff. And we had to really sit and talk about, what if we took this time for you to get to know her as this woman? Because this woman loves and hugs and kisses on you and says, "I love you," the very words you didn't hear for 60 years. And he really didn't want to. And over time and slowly, as he came to support groups and he worked with me one-on-one, he was able to meet his mama right where she was and accept her kisses. And that grown man sat by his mama's bed as she passed with me right there and talked about the forgiveness that he was able to work through, that acceptance and forgiveness that helped heal his relationship, because hate and anger destroys us. It's hard to work through whenever we are now responsible for somebody who wasn't good to us, especially an adult child having to take care of an abusive parent. That's some difficult stuff. But it is so much better and easier on us if we can work through that forgiveness while they're still alive than to be sitting at a bedside of somebody that's imminent and trying to work through it. I've watched that happen too many times. I put at the bottom of this slide, and again, you're going to get these slides. I got this book this past year. It's called Forgiving What You Can't Forget by Lisa TerKeurst. That is an exceptional, it's a really small, it's a great book. You could read it in one afternoon. And then she has a workbook that goes with it. So it's for anybody who really is working through forgiveness about some things that you know you're never going to forget. And she is a Christian writer also. And don't try to do that alone. You've got to listen to the voice of God when you're working through forgiveness. We can't do it by ourselves. You may even feel like God's who put this on you, and you might even be mad at God. God gives us other people. He gives us our church. He gives us support groups. He gives us professionals. He gives us therapists and counselors and pastors and ministers. But we have to be able to willing to accept that help. He will never leave or forsake you. Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged. And then I found this and I thought, wow, this is perfect for this program. 2 different views on life. And one says we only live once. And the other one says wrong. We only die once. We live every day. Oh, powerful stuff. Let me stop sharing. We are right at time. I appreciate all of y'all being here. Anybody have any questions or comments? I know it's a little bit different program, but I think especially this time of year, sometimes it is wise for us to work on thinking of our journey as our ministry. You will get the recording to this. You will get the PowerPoint. And if you are needing a CEU or a certificate of attendance, we will send you a link to a survey that we would like for all of you to do so that we can continue to improve our programming. Anybody have anything they'd like to add?
My internist has a friend that's a caregiver, and she's really burned out, but she doesn't know where to turn. So I'm going to email this whole program to this doctor.
Yep.
It's very good. Thanks.
Please do. Thank you. Glad you were here. Glad everybody was here. We do have our support group starting at 1 o'clock today that is online. If you'd like to join us, the link to that is on our website, or you can shoot me an email real quick and I'll send it to you. We meet from 1 to 2 every Wednesday online. So we're glad everybody was here. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.